want me to stay here?
Hi everyone. So first, I think Commissioner Grandi addressed the Security Council. He'll say a few words, and then we'll take a few questions.
So I think you followed, or maybe you can follow retroactively my statement at the Council. This is, there is an arrangement between UNHCR and the Council whereby about once a year I brief the Council on different situations that are of concern to us. And this is what I did today with Mozambique's presidency. And I focused, as you may have heard, on a theme that is very topical, I think, in the Council today, which is the disrespect of international humanitarian law, the growth of this phenomenon. And I made the link because, of course, IHL is, the custody of IHL is with the International Committee of the Red Cross. And Mirjana Spoljaric briefed the Council just a few days ago on this under the protection of civilians debate. But I made the link between those violations of IHL and displacement. Because, of course, if you conduct hostilities like we see in many places with the purpose also to terrorize civilians, civilians will move, will flee because they're afraid. So we see it's not the only factor, but it's an important factor. So I took that angle and I thought it was of interest to the Council, and of course with a strong reminder that the crisis that I raised in my last briefing to the Council in October last year, Myanmar, DRC, Ukraine, and a few others continue to be unresolved. Displacement has increased even further, and therefore I went back to the same crisis to update, and then we had a discussion on that. Thank you.
Hello, thank you, High Commissioner. Anade Sitima from Al Jazeera English. I'd like to ask about what might be known as, or particularly seen as a subculture of the refugee community, and I mean migrants that are traveling by boat, particularly in the Mediterranean. Recently, in the few months we've seen, it almost seems wrong to call them shipwrecks. It's almost like rubber boats sinking, boats sinking. What can you say about this community of refugees and what seems to be a gap in international policy or the international structure for handling refugee plights when it comes to those who are dying at sea and those who are unable to find help?
I fully agree with you, and this has been, we didn't really tackle this so much here, except if you want tangentially, and I'll say something about that. But first of all, in places like the Mediterranean in particular, it is important to restore the notion of the practice that we have a collective responsibility to rescue at sea. This is not even refugee law. This is the law of the sea. It dates back to the 17th century. And it's an obligation that is often not fulfilled by states. And we keep reminding them of this obligation, together with many organizations of civil society. And by the way, it's not only in the Mediterranean, but Southeast Asia, for example. Many of the Rohingya that are fleeing because of despair take to the seas and then are lost or get into difficult situations, and rescue is very sporadic. So it's important. But in that respect, I think it's important to see that challenge, that terrible challenge, that tragic challenge, as part of a broader issue of people that move for a variety of reasons. Some are refugees because they flee from war, persecution, violence. Others move because in search of better economic opportunities, so we would call them migrants. But this mixed flow of people characterize a lot of population movements across the African continent, North Africa, Mediterranean to Europe. There is also a route from the Middle East. There is increasingly a route from West Africa to Spain. But you have similar complex routes in the Americas, moving not necessarily, but mostly northwards. You have them in Southeast Asia, as I mentioned. You have them towards South Africa. So this is becoming a pattern that requires intervention not only in one piece of the journey, and especially not only when they arrive almost at the door of rich countries, where often they get caught into stigmatization, political problems, and so forth. We call this, we call it route-based approach. Let's look at the whole routes and and have solutions at every step of these journeys. The best, of course, is to look at root causes and try to address that, but that will always be complex. So let's look at these solutions in a more segmented way. This applies, by the way, also to those that try to reach Europe across the Mediterranean.
Thank you. Hi, Mr. Grandi. Good to have you back. Margaret Bashir with Voice of America. It was a pretty bleak briefing that you gave the Council.
I'm sorry about that.
Yeah. Is there any situation that you've been following where you see that the conditions may soon be ripe for safe, dignified returns? And maybe I missed it. I apologize if I did. Did you give a number for how many refugees did return in the past year home?
No, I didn't, because unfortunately that number is very, very small. When you talk about 114 million. By the way, 140 million refugees and displaced, which I mentioned again, is the last number, which is already a few months old. Next month, June, 20th of June, World Refugee Day, a few days before, we will issue, as we always do, the updated figures. We now do it about twice a year, but we'll do it in June, and I don't have yet because we're still finalizing that report, but it will be considerably higher than 114 million. So we will see another increase. Now, when you take that figure, which every year increases by a few million, and you see that, frankly, the returns are in the thousands, the disproportion is quite dramatic. And you ask a very important question: is there any place where we can look at with some hope? There's a few, of course. I can mention one, which is Kenya. Kenya is a very big refugee hosting country. They host about 600,000 Somali, South Sudanese, and other refugees. For a long time, this was a very complex issue for Kenya to deal with, in terms of security, in terms of social cohesion, and so forth. President Ruto, when he was elected a couple of years back, made a very important decisions, and he informed me that he had decided that the government had decided that refugees would become part of the communities. So it's a form of stabilization, of integration, for which, of course, Kenya needs international help. But it is very positive, because if Kenya moves into the direction of solving a refugee problem with local integration, which is rather challenging for many countries, it could be an incredible precedent and example for many other countries in Africa that have similar problems. So we're working very much with the Kenyan government to try, and with donors, partners, and international financial institutions, to try to promote this solution as fast as we can. So there are some bright spots, not many.
Stefano Vaccara, La Voce di New York, Int'l Press. Grazie al Dottor Grandi. I will say that your speech at the Security Council was one of the toughest at least me personally, ever heard here from High Commissioner. You say basically that the Security Council had to stop with this cacophony of voices. And well, at this point, the question is: can we still hope that the cacophony of voices ends on time to save people, like you say, they can still save people? And then I have another question on the report that the Washington Post had recently of migrants or refugees, we don't know, left in the desert by certain country. They mentioned Morocco, Tunisia, Mauritania, I believe. And they say that basically they did this work, dirty work, with the complicity of Europe, in the sense that the money to do this work comes from Europe. What do you think about that?
So on the first one, I think this is a question that is difficult to answer for anybody. Of course, I have hope. I said it. I concluded like that. But I had hope last time as well. That hope was not fulfilled. So, with time passing, it's more difficult to be optimistic about the ability of the Security Council to address what it should address, peace and security across the world. Because what I deal with is a humanitarian issue, but it's a consequence of the lack of solutions in the peace and security sphere. So we'll continue to encourage the Council to move in that direction. I use the word cacophony, which means really, different voices. In my last briefing in October, I said, we don't want to hear your voices, we want to hear your voice as the Security Council. But unfortunately, divisions are very prevalent over each one of these crises. I hope this will change at some point. On your second point, yes, I read those reports. The European Union has a number of partnership agreements with countries in that belt, or is negotiating a partnership agreement, most of which include a segment on migration management. This is bilateral. UNHCR is not involved. What we keep telling the European Union and the respective countries is that when you make agreements and resources are given by the Union to these countries to manage these flows, this goes back to my point about routes, it is important that you do it in a manner that respects international law, respects the rights of refugees, but also the right of migrants. Migrants have important rights. And is that always done? No. There are instances in which it is not done, and we intervene if it is about refugees. But we have been able to influence at least some of these discussions in the direction that we want. Still, long way to go. One thing that I always tell the European Union, but also other rich countries that are destination for these flows, I always tell them, when you respond, because this is a challenge, when you respond to these situations, don't only invest resources in control and limitations, because in any case that will not address the problem. But invest in opportunities and capacity building in a positive way, especially in the countries in transit. We'll continue that discussion. Thank you very much. Thank you all. Bye-bye.